Welcome once again to the Benedictine Monastery of the Holy Cross, Rostrevor, County Down, Northern Ireland. We continue our Lenten journey together and called to be a people who walk together. We are called to be a people who are reconciled. Because we fall out of a relationship with God and with each other, we need to be renewed in that relationship with God and with each other. We entered into the Lenten season, as every year, listening to this call which comes to us through the Apostle Paul in the letter he addressed to the Corinthians, his second letter to that Christian community. This is what he had to say. God is appealing through us. Be reconciled. This is the favourable time. This is the day of salvation. So an extraordinary gift is offered to us during Lent. This is a favourable time for us to experience the grace of reconciliation. The message of the Apostle Paul is rooted in the teaching of the prophets of the Old Testament. I think, for example, of what the prophet Isaiah has to write in chapter 49 of his famous prophecy. One of our exercises during Lent will be to have taken up our Bibles and to be reading them more assiduously. So perhaps you could go and find your own Bible and read from that chapter 49 of Isaiah's prophecy. The prophet in that text promised the people restoration, new life. The promise of life is echoed throughout the Gospels, and it's spoken of in terms of resurrection. God's gift of restoration and new life is resurrection, and that is what our Lenten observance seeks to prepare us to receive. The whole purpose of Lent is to prepare us for Easter, at the heart of which is the experience of resurrection. And the way to entry into this gift of resurrection is through forgiveness. It is by accepting forgiveness for ourselves and allowing it to flow through us and reach out to others that new life is given to us, that broken relationships are restored, that we enter into an experience of Christ's resurrection. The late Cardinal Lustiger, Jean-Marie Lustiger of Paris, Cardinal who marked the life of the late 20th century tremendously, expresses this thought in a little line, a statement that really touched me when I first read it in French, which I will now quote to you. And he proclaimed these words from the pulpit of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. He said simply, "Every pardon offered is a victory of the risen Lord in our lives." I would say even more than that, that every pardon offered and every pardon received is an experience of resurrection, an extraordinary gift of God's grace for both the giver and the receiver. Paul writes to the Romans that God's forgiving power is so far-reaching, so strong, that we become entirely new creatures through it. Our lives become transformed, recreated. The apostle puts it this way, I quote, "We are a brand new person inside. We are not the same anymore. A new life begins for us." Isn't that an extraordinary promise? A new life begins for us. Does that thought not encourage you and me today? But then again, there may be thoughts that arise within our hearts that lead us to question, what exactly does that mean? Yes, doubts can arise within us. They're there in our hearts. We may say to ourselves, it's all fine to talk about becoming new persons, entering into a new experience of life, being transformed and rising with Christ. But it doesn't happen at the click of a finger. It doesn't happen in our lives just as it might sound in the line quoted. Old habits die hard. Old behaviour patterns are not easy to throw off. Out with the old and in with the new sounds simple, but it isn't. What is it that is needed to bring about the new thing that we long for in life? Among the things required of us is a certain surrender of ourselves to God. We can be afraid of that, to surrender ourselves to God. Letting go frightens us. But that's what we have to do in order to receive the new thing being offered to us. We must learn to set aside our tendency to do everything our way, under our terms and according to our conditions. Again and again, the Bible bears witness to the fact that when God's people walked their own way without paying heed to the life directions He gave them, they walked into a dead end, a path of self-destruction. And it's the same with us. We long for resurrection, but we continually walk into dead ends when we follow just our own will, our own desire. The call for us is to choose the way of life. When we try to go it alone, walking life's path without reference to God, then more often than not, the way we follow is a foolish one that ends in ruin. When we are in the driving seat alone, we swerve and crash. When we walk alone, we stumble and fall. The call and the challenge addressed to us today is to live our lives as Christ lived His. Not doing His own thing, but as He tells us Himself when He speaks in the Gospel, doing only what the Father sent Him to do. Jesus worked not out of His own strength alone, but in communion with the Father. He worked in the Father's name. And we must learn to surrender our lives to God's will as Jesus surrendered His to the Father's will. And He teaches us to pray each and every day that God's will may be done in our lives. May this Lenten season see all of us striving to develop our relationship with God, who is the source of life. May it see us being able to say, as Jesus could say, that whatever we accomplish, we do in God's name, under His leading and His guidance. Only then, like Christ, will we be truly, fully living beings, men and women completely alive to God, well and wonderfully alive within ourselves and in relationship with all those around us, those with whom we are called to share our lives, and those with whom we are called to share the grace of resurrection through the forgiveness we offer and the forgiveness we receive. Yes, every pardon offered is a victory of the risen Lord in our lives, as Cardinal Lustiger taught. And as I have gone on to say, every pardon offered and every pardon received is an experience of resurrection, that extraordinary gift of God's grace for which we prepare ourselves as we pursue our Lenten journey. Risen Lord, help us to live our share in your resurrection by being men and women who offer your forgiveness. As you died on the cross, you prayed to the Father, asking that He forgive those who sinned against you. Help us to pray as you did for the forgiveness of those who have wounded us, and help us to ask in prayer for the grace of forgiveness for those times when we have hurt or offended others in a way that has damaged their lives. Amen.
Domine